Good morning, everybody. Well, this ought to be a fun discussion. Eric, for any of you that don't know, has been one of the longest time members of the Bitcoin community, has built some really incredible projects inside of the ecosystem the last few years. People may know him from projects like Satoshi Dice, which really sort of pushed the bounds around testing how many transactions can this network handle. And so quite a few. And you guys at one point were, what, 50% of the transactions?
Is my mic on? Sounds like it. Yeah, at one point we were more than 50% of all the Bitcoin transactions on the network.
Right.
And this is something I just sort of saw randomly, and I was like, wow, this is getting out of hand quick.
And then after that, you moved on and created Counterparty down in Panama.
Before that was BitInstant. So
okay.
I was head of marketing at BitInstant back when Charlie was still a free man. He's actually, I think, he's turning himself in tomorrow?
2 days.
In 2 days? Yeah. 2 days. So we'll pour one out for Charlie later.
And then after that, on to Counterparty with basically a vision for bringing SMS and email to Bitcoin capabilities and opening that up in the developing world.
Yep. Yeah, Counterparty's main intention originally was to be a secure wallet and to enable people to send Bitcoins to SMS numbers, which of course allows the developing world to use it because they don't necessarily have smartphones with data connections. Right. So the ability to send a Bitcoin transaction to an SMS is a pretty cool technology, and that's kind of how Counterparty got started. And then it grew, and we created something called locks, which is a way to stabilize a Bitcoin balance, to lock it to a stable asset like dollars. Well, stable asset like dollars, stably declining over time, or gold. And so that's sort of what Counterparty's focus is right now. But I left a year ago in this month.
And I think, Eric, one of the things that's been really interesting for me is you've always focused on sort of these, I think, those fundamental projects. At each time in the ecosystem, there needed to be a way to buy Bitcoin. In fact, I used BitInstant for the first Bitcoins I ever bought, right? And I think that story is true of a lot of people in the ecosystem. And then you moved on to solving other problems around wallets and stability. And now you've shifted and announced that you're actually been the mystery CEO behind ShapeShift, which is becoming very popular. Tell me about why you think that's sort of this next fundamental piece that needs to be in place and why you've shifted your focus there.
I did shift my focus to it. Basically, a year ago, I was trying to buy some stupid altcoin that I had seen, and I didn't really want to spend much time on it. I just wanted to place a little money on it and see if it would turn into anything, and I realized that to do so was going to require like an afternoon where I would have to sign up with an exchange, give them some amount of personal information, deposit money, wait for many confirmations, put in a bid order, wait for it to fill, or deal with slippage, and then withdraw the other coin, which can also take an hour or two with some of these exchanges. So I just thought that was a little bit ridiculous in the age of digital currency. Why do we need to wait more than a few seconds to change from one coin to another? So from that sort of inconvenience, ShapeShift was born. And so it was about a year ago that I started it, and it launched in August. And then about 2 weeks ago, I came out of the closet as the head of it.
Well, for those that aren't familiar, you basically have the ability to simply send to an address Bitcoins or whatever coin and get any other token after one block.
Yeah, and it's sort of based on the model that Satoshi Dice was, wherein there's no user accounts, and you simply use the blockchain to send a transaction, and based on where you send this transaction, something else will happen. In the case of Satoshi Dice, it was gambling, and in the case of ShapeShift, it triggers a conversion of coins, and it sends you the coin that you want to have. So both allow you to do something far faster. And what I realized, I built it to be convenient and quick, but I realized when it was getting built that it was actually far more secure, far more safe. And we all know how many exchanges get hacked. Just in the time that ShapeShift has been out, Beater was hacked, and MintPal was hacked. People lose a lot of money in these because they're storing a lot of money in these. And we should all care about consumer protection. And I think the best consumer protection comes from the market. And so ShapeShift is built to actually protect consumers, to not require their information, to bring it all together into one big database where it can be hacked. And we see this happen all the time with companies like Target and Sony. And if billion-dollar companies can't secure the data that they collect from people, clearly it's reasonable to not collect that data in the first place, unless your goal is not to protect consumers, but simply to control what they're doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's helpful to understand that because, as you said, one of the biggest pain points the community has run into has been this problem of exchanges periodically, even well-run ones with lots of backing and lots of security personnel. There's always a vulnerability. There's always some zero-day bug that people haven't thought of. And so I think that's pretty genius. And so the way you're limiting counterparty risk is by doing that transaction immediately, not having an account. And where is it actually coming from? Are these pools that ShapeShift owns? Have you disclosed how that works in the background?
Yeah, it's very, very simple. ShapeShift holds an inventory of all the coins that are supported on the platform. And so we're very much like a vending machine that you walk up to and you put a quarter in and you get your Snickers bar. So the vending machine has an inventory of these things and it will sell them to you at the price that it shows you. And it's really no more complicated than that. Another good example is how a TravelX kiosk at the airport works. When you go up, you don't have an account with TravelX. They usually, in most places, don't require ID. They take real money and give you a different kind of real money. And so that model is being done with ShapeShift, but digitally.
Very cool. Now, this is a bit of a pivot for yourself from an intellectual perspective, because I remember in previous years you'd been sort of an open critic or skeptic of the idea of alternative coins competing with Bitcoin. What really evolved in your thinking that moved you in a different direction?
Yeah, so I think I gave kind of a rant down in South America once at one of the conferences about altcoins and what I thought of them. And in general, the belief is that money is a way of measuring value. It's a measurement, just like kilometers is a way of measuring distance. And just as it doesn't make sense to have hundreds of different ways to measure distance, 2 in the world is bad enough and confusing enough. It also doesn't make much sense to have lots of different monies. And so that was my belief. What changed was that I realized that to the extent that a certain money is different, it can have a niche use where the primary money does not appropriately fit in. So what we see now are lots of these altcoins, alternative digital assets of various kinds, that do things that are fundamentally unique from Bitcoin. They are not just replicating Bitcoin and tweaking a few little parameters. I would say Litecoin does that. But they actually do something fundamentally different. And so good examples are coins like Nubits or BitUSD or Tether. All three of these track the value of the dollar. And that is something fundamentally different that Bitcoin does not and cannot do. And so there is a certain value there. And there needs to be a way to exchange those coins very easily. And I think as we move into the future, you're going to see all sorts of digital assets. Some of them won't even really be monies. They will just be other types of things. And to the extent that there are digital assets, that's why ShapeShift was built. So this has broadened my thinking a little bit, and I'm a little less hostile to the altcoins. And actually, even the altcoins that are stupid and worthless, they provide a way to experiment, which is really helpful. I think it's a sign of a healthy ecosystem when people can experiment with all these technologies and play around with things. And certainly a lot of development lessons have been learned.
Cool. So you've been in this community for a long time, longer than myself. What have you seen really change and evolve as, let's say, the projects have matured, things have scaled? What's really different today, and where do you see it going?
So the most exciting thing is that the predictions that us crazy people on internet forums had 4 years ago are actually becoming true. And I remember all these arguments between people over whether big companies like Microsoft would ever accept Bitcoin. And of course, most people said no, like they would not be interested, or there's nothing about Bitcoin that would be important to companies like this. And here we are. It was only a few years, and we have Microsoft, we have Dell, we have Expedia, and more will certainly come. So what we predicted that the system would grow and become something that was not just a niche industry, but actually something that had profound economic value, and that businesses over time would see that. And that because of that, adoption was essentially inevitable. It was just a question of how and when. So it's really good to see that coming into play. Every day is another validation that this is actually starting to take over, to replace, to improve the financial world. So that's what I'm most happy about. Obviously, what comes with that when you bring more and more people into the community is that the community becomes more diverse. And whereas it was, a bunch of tech geeks and crypto anarchists in the beginning, now there are just normal business people who only care about making some money with a product, and that's great. There are people who use it for all kinds of things, some of which don't really align with the original ideology, but that's fine. I mean, you can't expect Bitcoin to take over the world without the entire world being involved. So I think people shouldn't be scared that there is a diversity of opinion. I think people shouldn't be scared that a lot of people in Bitcoin might rightly be called socialists now, or might advocate government regulation in one form or another, or that banks are getting involved, like BBVA's investment into Coinbase. All these things are extremely healthy signs of the maturity of the industry, and we should be very happy about them.
And on that topic, what do you see as far as the friction points between those that are advocating for regulation and those that are advocating against? Where do you fall in sort of that spectrum? You've built projects that have had to deal with a lot of different regulatory environments in a lot of different countries, Satoshi Dice especially, but also Counterparty and others. As I understand, Counterparty couldn't service the U.S.
That's right.
Yep. What was that like? Yeah. Where do you think that's going?
Well, it is tragic, of course, that the land of the free is the country that is most risky to serve as a business. That should tell you something very fundamentally wrong is happening. And it's, I think Bitcoin kind of forces the issue into the spotlight. Yeah, Coinapult, we decided to move it outside of the country completely because we didn't trust how regulators would react. And not only did we do that, but we blocked the US entirely. So 350 million Americans can't use the lock service because the government is looking out for them. So it's tragic. I think with this diversity, a lot of people that are looking to pursue regulation, I think I like the Hydra approach, basically, where we have people building in all directions. We have people building things like Dark Wallet, and we have people talking with the highest levels of government and banks to integrate in a state-approved manner, and everything in between. I think that's the healthy way that this moves forward.
Now, when I think about the biggest point of tension there, it often comes back to privacy. Because, as I've seen with a number of projects, often the issue is around the existing laws, many of which came out of the Patriot Act, around KYC, AML, all sorts of new levels of compliance that basically require every merchant to collect an enormous amount of private information about people, and then we've seen the effect. We've seen these huge databases, Target and Chase and all these groups periodically get hacked, and 80 million people just lost all their personal information. Whoops, we're sorry, it's the law. We can't do anything about it. And so where do you see that going when it comes to privacy versus sort of these entrenched legacy rules?
I think the issue of financial privacy is absolutely fundamental, and the industry needs to stand up and defend it in the same way that the internet industry, to a large extent, has defended various types of internet privacy and speech. And for some reason, people generally are cool with privacy when it comes to your personal life. If you're in your home with your doors locked and your shades down, people don't assume you're doing something evil. And yet, if you want that same privacy when it comes to finances, people assume you're doing something evil. And not only will they assume that, but they will often say that you're doing something illegal and that you need to be prosecuted for it. And this is a terrible hypocrisy, and something befitting of North Korea or China certainly not befitting of the United States of America. So now that people can actually have privacy in their finances, now that we can actually keep Bitcoin safe and secret, it forces the issue. And this is going to be something that is a very big topic of discussion, I'd say, over the next half decade. And my concern is that people in the industry will be too scared of the regulators to actually stand up and fight for this. And that's understandable, because the regulators are the ones with the guns, and they will come in and shut you down and steal your property and take away your freedom and life, reputation. They will destroy whatever they need to destroy in order to maintain control over this. So to some degree, it takes a certain amount of bravery and a certain amount of willingness to fight for something that you believe in. And I'm hopeful that the Bitcoin industry will pick that up to a large degree. And that's the people in this room and the people that are watching this that need to, both in their speech and in their actions, fight for this thing.
So is that a particular strategy that you can articulate, or is that whatever a particular company needs to do in order to achieve that? If that means leaving the country, if that means building their technology in a different way that doesn't hold funds or expose them to those requirements?
Well, first, I think the specific right that must be asserted is that a person who is not even accused of a crime has the right to financial privacy. That's a very simple way to say it. But what the implications are of that is that if you are a business and you have a customer, if that customer is not being accused of a crime, is not even doing anything suspicious, he should be permitted to maintain absolute privacy, and that means anonymity in that company, in that service. The regulations, in many cases, will require that not be done. That it will require that essentially businesses spy on their users in a very Orwellian sense, take their personal information, store it in a big database that can be hacked, and if it's not hacked, can be taken by various government agencies without anyone knowing about it in the first place. And while we all abhor the world of 1984, we seem complacent in just allowing it to creep up on us. So let's take this opportunity to permit someone who is not accused of a crime to be private with their money. I think that's a simple way, and businesses should sign on to that principle and fight for it.
Pretty radical concept that privacy is a human right. I'll tell you.
It makes me an extremist to say that in America, to say those things.
No. I'm really interested to get into some of the details around, what you think is next as far as infrastructure that the community needs to build. We've seen these different waves of evolution around, the focus on building the right exchanges, building the right wallets. A lot of people say we're still very much in those early days. Do you think there's going to be a technology around privacy or a technology around providing auditability and transparency that's going to enable what you're talking about? Or where are you looking to sort of push that forward?
Well, we certainly see the technological pushback, people developing tools to maintain privacy. The great example, of course, is as Bitcoin started to be revealed as something that was not so perfectly anonymous, which had a certain amount of privacy, but which was easily breached. Right around that time is when projects like, Darkcoin started gaining power, traction. Projects like Dark Wallet. These are essentially pushbacks to the realization that the privacy that we thought we had was not there, and so people are building the tools already to increase that privacy. So those projects should be absolutely supported, I think.
So specifically, you're referring to a lot of people's concern that given Bitcoin is a public ledger, given that it's a public record of all of these transactions, even though there's not real identity connected to that particular address, there's a lot of agencies or even companies that have been doing analysis on that and trying to essentially figure out patterns and take away some of that privacy. So are there some of those, so the technologies you're referencing are basically trying to push back against that and say, no, we do want to maintain privacy as a core aspect of Bitcoin.
Yeah, and this obviously puts people in a fundamental conflict with some of the laws. Because if the laws say that you need to spy on your users, then how can you build software that prevents you from spying on your users without breaking the law? So that's why a lot of these super anonymous projects are not built as companies. They are built as open source projects, essentially, where no money is involved, because thankfully the right to write software is still protected, and people who develop those tools are not under legal threat, at least not yet. But hopefully actual companies that have the money and the resources to fight on a more rhetorical, philosophical, policy level will build these tools as well, and will defend them.
No, the way I see your personal role, Eric, in the community is very similar to the way I see Roger Ver.
Yes.
As sort of one of the people that speaks consistently about the ethics and sort of the conscience of the community when it comes to these important aspects like privacy. What drives that? What personally, what gave you that passion? Why do you care so much about that?
Well, we all grow up in school, most of us sadly in public school, but nevertheless we learn about this important thing that happened hundreds of years ago, which was the separation of church and state, right? And we learn why that was so important, that humans used to live in societies under which their religion, something very personal and precious to them as individuals, was under the management of an organization that could control those things, that could tell you what to worship and how and when and why. And somehow society realized that perhaps that was unethical, that we shouldn't permit control of something so personal and important to your life to be controlled by the state. So everyone hails the separation of church and state, at least in the Western world, people tend to. So it is that narrative of human development under which I believe that we now have other fights to fight. And I would say in the realm of Bitcoin, it is namely the separation of money and state. And money is absolutely as fundamental to our lives as religion, and for many people it is far more fundamental to their lives as religion. It affects how your life unfolds. The choices that you make about money dictate the ramifications of your life and those around you. And so to have an institution like money so controlled by a central entity, by a monopoly, is absurd. It is immoral. We should get rid of it. And it seems crazy to say this, but perhaps we should permit competition in money, permit competition in financial structures, just as we permit competition in religion, and we allow multiple churches to exist. Why do we do that? And why don't we do that with money? I think it's a hypocrisy that our children someday will look back on and realize, wow, that was really obvious. And Bitcoin is what will bring that change about. So that's what inspires me. I think that's what inspires people like Roger, and hopefully it will inspire enough of the people in this community to keep fighting for that as the technology grows.
That's really inspirational, and I love that historical perspective. I've often drawn the analogy to the Reformation and sort of that fundamental move from a hierarchy controlling a particular aspect of our society to where we're allowing for competition. Mm-hmm. So I think that historical perspective is important, and I've often talked and written about decentralization as a method that gets us here, but I know you've got some views on decentralization versus centralization and where they make sense. So I'm interested to see where you are in that scope and which situations you think really the community really has an ethic of always going for the decentralized thing, but not everything can yet be decentralized. And so what's your perspective on that?
So Bitcoin enabled this amazing thing, which is to decentralize money. And as we developed the blockchain technology, we realized that actually applies to lots of other things as well. And we can decentralize all sorts of great things like contracts and all this stuff. So the community has this sort of constant hunger to decentralize everything. And there is an intense cynicism toward anything that remains centralized. And there's a lot of good reason for that. I mean, the fiascos that we've had in this community tend to be when there is a centralized entity that is holding funds and through negligence or corruption or hacking or whatever is compromised and everyone loses their money. And it's because trust was placed in some party. So there's this idea that we shouldn't trust any parties at all and we should decentralize everything. And I think as a general theme that's reasonable, but for economic efficiency reasons, there's also a lot of times and places in which certain degrees of centralization become important. And people need to not necessarily be afraid of that. What they should be afraid of or resist is coercive centralization. And that's what we have with the current financial system. We have a system in which you are coerced into using one monopolistic money through legal tender laws and how the taxation works. And that is, and because we are all coerced into that central structure, we are vulnerable to any flaws of that structure. Any malfeasance on behalf of our wise rulers reciprocates down to us. And if we don't like it, what can we do? Right? We're stuck. We all have to use dollars. We all have to use the Federal Reserve banking system until now. And so people should realize that the crucial element of centralization is whether or not it is coercive or not. And a business that is centralized, you can always leave it. You can always leave a company that you don't trust, and if they abuse that trust, you can go away from them. And that's the key. That's what makes something that's centralized worthy of defending, worthy of having or building, and something that is coercively centralized, worthy of avoiding and resisting everywhere we can.
So in other words, exit and entry. If you
Yeah,
have free exit and entry.
Yeah, the ability to opt out. If you can opt out of something, then why need you fear it?
Right. We can all choose to have a Facebook account or not have a Facebook
Yes.
account.
Yes.
It may be very attractive if there's a huge network effect of people that are using it, but I still have the option.
Right. And this is something where like most of the world would disagree with me when I say that I think what Facebook does with your data is totally fine, right? I mean, you should read the terms of service. And just because you're too lazy to read all those pages doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. If you're going to use that service, it's your responsibility to figure that stuff out. And just because you like the convenience of that service doesn't mean that the personal responsibility element is removed. So, you know, if a service is bothering you too much, leave it and put social pressure on other people to do the same. But don't use the guns of government to force Facebook to do various things just because you don't want to read a terms of service. Like that kind of laziness is how a lot of tyrannical problems creep up on us, I think.
Well, I think there's some parallels in our own history when you look at some people have been critical of Coinbase, for example. Mm-hmm. But in truth, I agree, it's a very convenient service. And if you're willing to risk, having them hold your keys, I wouldn't personally do that, but, you have that option. And if they break that trust, you have that option to leave.
Yeah, strategically with Coinbase, they get a lot of flack from the community. And certainly they are even more obtrusive than many banks. If you've ever dealt with them, especially as a merchant, they will ask you what you're actually doing with the money. Banks don't really do that. And so it's easy to hate on them, but you have to understand that they are like the biggest target from the regulator's perspective. They are the company after which the banks are going to attack with every piece of regulation that they can. So they have to be extremely paranoid, and they have to do more than compliance. And they are a very important piece of the ecosystem. They are one of the bridges that allow people to easily move from the fiat structure into the decentralized cryptocurrency structure. And in the future that I think we're all envisioning, there may not be many needs for what Coinbase does now, which is interface with the banks, because the banks may not be there to interface with, and that would be great. But for now, we need companies like that, and they need to do whatever they need to do to stay in operation and to stay out of jail. And if they are being too onerous for you, which is understandable, just don't use them.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I used to think that we'd really see reform either politically or economically in jurisdictions, or in particular jurisdictions. And now that I've spent more time in the Bitcoin and blockchain ecosystem the last 3 years, I've come to this view that we're seeing a lot of services emerge that are jurisdiction agnostic, and that you don't necessarily have to go through a particular jurisdiction to achieve reform. But we are starting to see a few real-world jurisdictions become friendly or friendlier to blockchain technology. There's been word and friendly policies out of Switzerland, out of Isle of Man, out of Jersey and other places like that. Do you think it's worth pushing forward those jurisdictional specific friendly policies and really trying to focus energy on that? Or are you spending, I guess, most of your own time on things that are sort of jurisdictionally agnostic and just simply pushing forward the technology, and that forces the conversation across many jurisdictions?
Well, this goes back to the Hydra approach, right? And I'm really glad that there are people with the stomach for the politicians who can go and be polite and give them the reverence that they so desperately crave from their minions in order to push through less onerous regulation. Because if we don't engage regulators, they will still be engaging us. This is true. So I'm very glad that there are people that do that. I don't typically care to, but I respect the people that do, as long as they are consistently putting pressure toward enabling people to be free and private with their money. So yeah, I'm really glad that there have been and there's lots of things that really go unseen. Like, we all read Reddit all the time, and we all see a lot of the drama and stuff that happens there. But there are so many things and so much work that's being done by people behind the scenes that you know, it's unfortunate that they don't get credit as much as they should. But they often do their work based on a passion in the same way that many of us do. They get more seen. Mm-hmm. So to any of you out there that are doing amazing things in Bitcoin and people might not recognize you, realize that as the industry moves forward, it is because of you, and that due will come later. Very
good. Well, we've got about 8 more minutes on the schedule, and if it's all right with you, I'd like to take a few questions from the audience a little bit and not monopolize the Eric Voorhees question asking time. So I'll ask a few more questions, but if people want to line up across the mic or think of your questions, feel free to start coming up. Hopefully the mic is live, and we can take a few questions. But no, I've really enjoyed this, kind of going deeper, understanding your personal motivations, and what's your ultimate goal out of all of this? If things go as we hope they will in this ecosystem and continue to evolve out of the years, what's success for you? Where do we achieve that sort of goal line? Is it, you know, some level of adoption? Is it some you know, old legacy systems moving away? What's that success look like?
The end zone for me is the complete and utter abandonment of fiat currency around the world. I think that will be the sign that we won. I mean, we'll know we win long before that, but maybe we already are. But the abandonment of fiat currency. Fiat currency is a money that people are forced to use and gets its value from force. It is a pen into which people are corralled and through which all sorts of terrible manipulations are carried out on people. Many of the ills of the world stem from it. The ability to inflate money and pay for things beyond what you can tax from a population is a very sneaky and terrible way that organizations maintain power over people. Getting rid of people's dependence on fiat solves that problem to a large degree. Right. So there's still going to be banks. I don't want banks to all collapse. Like, banks are going to change a lot, but they're still going to be around providing useful services for people. But the central thing that needs to go away is people's use of fiat. And it won't be done by diktat. It's not going to be done because we force them not to use fiat. It's going to be done because they figure out that there's better alternatives and they voluntarily walk away from it. Right.
Well, our first question, George Gilder.
A few years back, Bill Joy in Wired wrote an article about the asymmetrical nature of many contemporary technologies, where the possibility of destruction becomes greater than possibilities of defense, or at least that real perils stem from biotech and nuclear and other cyber ways of attacking society. what sort of cooperation with the constabulary or governments do you think is appropriate and what isn't? And how would you address these real threats? I mean, they're frightening.
Well, what is the specific threat that you're worried about?
One that Joy presented was biotech, release of deadly organisms, plagues, infiltration of nuclear weapons in suitcases in major cities. Your imagination surely can.
Well, yeah, I would say the way to get rid of dangers like that is to not incentivize people to carry out terrible attacks upon a population. And that is typically accomplished not by bombing, women and children in far-off lands. So I think if that sort of warfare across the oceans upon other people was lessened, the threat of serious calamity of the kind that you're talking about goes down as well.
Say you were in Israel, what would be your policy?
If I was Israel, Israel is just a territory of land. You mean if I was a politician in Israel, I would quit and go do something productive.
What would that be?
What's that?
What would that be? What's this productive thing you'd do if you were a politician in Israel?
Well, anything voluntary that people find useful and they can pay you for voluntarily is by definition productive.
Israel does that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your philosophical comments. I find it very stimulating. And the question I have to offer is philosophical in nature. Because there's the perennial philosophical issue about the freedom that an individual gives up in order to participate in any community at whatever stage of development, from the very lowest technological society to the highest technological society. And so there was the concept of the social contract that was developed during the Enlightenment to explain why it is that people would participate, give up personal freedom in exchange for the benefits that come from participation in a community that has mores or laws to which the individual must conform. That includes enforcement. Otherwise, there are things that you would suffer if you don't comply.
Are you asking my opinion of the social contract?
So the question, to be a little more precise, is the problem with the social contract is that people are born into societies, born into cultures, born into these hierarchical structures. So the idea that they actually made a conscious choice as an individual to participate in that social contract is really a metaphor. Now, the power of the blockchain, as you've described it, gives the power to much greater power for individuals to opt out of any hierarchy. So the question I have for you is, if you greatly empower individuals to opt out of a social contract that was really forced on them by birth, what does that do to the concept of having a community that provides benefits, if everybody can opt out of it?
Yeah, so I take issue with the assumption that one is born into a society. I think you are born into a family by typically a father and a mother. And it is really to that family that your allegiance is owed. The first many years of your life, they are the ones that take care of you and make sure that you live. And anything that you choose to do by branching out beyond that should be voluntary. I don't think an infant has an obligation to the neighbor next door unless the two households have some sort of contract between the two of them. And I don't think an infant has an obligation to pay taxes 20 years later for debts taken on by politicians 30 years prior. These things, again, make me an extremist, but I completely think that the social contract is a myth and belongs in the category of unicorns and fairies. And people should just be peaceful with each other. They should engage voluntarily with each other through real contracts, not made up unicorn contracts.
One more question. We have time for one more question.
Sure.
Yep.
So after your experience with the SEC and regulators, are there any companies you'd like to mention that you are particularly worried about that are going to run into perhaps even bigger trouble? Like I can throw some names out, but I don't want to pick on any.
Am I worried about certain companies
like Ethereum's crowd sale, or even like MadeSafe, or any of the other ones, or any other mergers in the space that you're a little worried that the regulators might come down hard on them?
Well, I'm worried for every human being on the planet that a regulator will do something to them. I think after the Satoshi Dice situation with the SEC, everyone who released crypto equities or securities of some kind has been a lot more careful to beg for permission where they need it, where they're alleged to need it. I know that things like the Ethereum crowd sale were delayed for over a year because after Satoshi Dice, they were very worried how regulators would respond. I mean, this is exactly what regulation does. It puts a chill on the industry, and what might be one of the most innovative technological platforms ever made was held back from humanity by a year because the SEC came after me for making some investors money. And this sort of absurdity, of course, is going to run rampant whenever we talk about regulation. Ultimately, people have to do what they can do to keep themselves safe. I don't want people in the industry to become martyrs, but hopefully people will find a good balance between pushing back upon laws that don't deserve to exist.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Eric, I want to thank you. A round of applause for Eric Voorhees today. All right.